This Sofirn dive torch can give you not one, not two, but three different lights. Potentially four if you count a turbo mode. But it's an interesting concept that you can switch different colors on the fly, and it could be a game changer for you. And by the way, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Don, a cold water diver and underwater storyteller, and I post weekly scuba diving videos to help you build skills, dive with more confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And today we're going to dive on into the Sofirn SD11. Let's get started. And so to kick things off, let's talk about the weight. This thing isn't super light, but it's also not super heavy. It's a decent weight, but it's noticeable at 11 ounces or about 200 grams. It's about 6.2 inches long or 157 millimeters, and the head's about 1 inch tall or about 50 millimeters. So one thing to note that it has a 1/4 inch thread. And so that's in inches, not the millimeter version. So if you do have a millimeter type screw or joint connector, it won't work. We get so far and it just won't screw in more. So it's worth noting you need the inch threading or else it won't work. You can get this type of threading and be able to screw it in all the way pretty easily. So it's nice to have this mounting options. You can potentially mount this on a Goodman handle as well. You can also use it as a soft Goodman handle. You can also use the typical lanyard if you like to hold it in your hand. I, for one, particularly don't like to hold things in my hands. I like to have my hands free, so I'm doing whatever I can to keep it out of my hands as much as possible. But let's go ahead and take a look at that battery. So it's one thing worth noting that the battery is just going to be this back part, and it pops off. So this thing has two O-rings. One is a backup. Of course, you only need one ever, but just in case one gets nicked, you always have the backup. So it's always important when you take these things off to review the O-rings, look for nicks, and make sure that they're looking okay, because you don't want both to be fail or else the thing will flood. And when you take a look at the battery, it's kind of this standard form factor that I'm seeing with a lot of dive torches these days, which is nice because they're interchangeable. But it's a 7,500 milliamp hour, 26,800 Li-ion 3.7 volt battery. And it has a nice label. So this is one thing you always want to make sure that it's labeled clearly for travel, because the airline security will check for this number. And if it's not labeled clearly, they may not let you travel with it. And it's USB chargeable, and that's nice. You don't need anything extra to charge this thing. And almost everyone's going to have USB-C cables lying around nowadays. And there is a little indicator to which way you should point the battery. So positive in, and it should have a flat on the back with the spring, and you just kind of push it in and it screws on fairly easily. You just want to make sure while you're screwing it in, you don't damage those O-rings. So we can take a look at the unboxing experience. It is packaged fairly nicely. Comes with a lanyard, a USB-C. It comes with the battery. It doesn't come with the attachment point, so you'll have to get that. Just remember, it's a 1/4 inch thread. And if you do accidentally damage those O-rings, it comes with 2 extra O-rings. The packaging is fairly straightforward and easy to unbox. And then let's talk about depth. This thing can go down to 100 meters or 330 feet. So that's plenty for most. So it feels sturdy, which is good. You don't ever need to dive with it that deep. But what is nice is because it's so pressurized, as you're approaching deeper depths, you know that this thing can take a lot of force, a lot of movement without ever risking flooding. That's just a peace of mind. All right, now let's talk about the important bits, the actual lighting. And so this is a magnetic switch. There's nothing mechanical here, aside from you actually using your fingers to move it around. So even with that corrosive salt water, this should last over time. At least as of yet, I have seen no actual issues, and it's been working fairly flawlessly. The only thing I might gripe about is because I'm a cold water diver, I have these thick gloves on. This little switch here can be hard to sometimes find with thick gloves on. If you don't have gloves, then it's no problem at all, because it's pretty easy to find with my thumb. But just imagine thick gloves kind of swiping left and right and sometimes not quite finding this little switch. And so that's some of the issues I was having while diving. And then sometimes the button is kind of small. It could be a little bit bigger for cold water divers, but it's definitely not the worst. I would say it's tolerable and it's not that big of a deal. I can find it fairly easily and operate it no problem. But for the most part, this toggle is fairly easy to use, so I have no big complaints. This toggle will also help you select those 3 different colors I was talking about. So let's go ahead and talk about that now. some of the functions and how to use this thing. So the easiest thing to know is standard light. What you're probably used to is that normal white light. And so just flicking it to my left or towards me is going to turn on that standard light. And so each mode is going to have 3 different brightnesses. So bam, bam, bam. Well, that's actually 4. And so normally I memorize these, but with this one, it's so many modes that I'm going to go ahead and have a reference so I don't get them wrong. But at the lowest mode, we have 300 lumens, and then we have 700 lumens, and then we move up to 1200 lumens, and then 2200 lumens. And so this is the turbo mode. And also it's pretty bright. I mean, you'll probably see that it's pretty decently bright. I can also double click it to get this 1300 lumen. So this is the cool white light, and this is the neutral white light. Okay, and now let's talk about the other color. So you move it back to the neutral position, it turns off. So one nice thing is while you're flipping through those modes, it never turns off until you switch this magnetic switch to the center, and then it's off. At the lowest setting, we have 400 lumens, and we have 800 lumens, and then we have 1600 lumens, and then we have 3200 lumens. So that's the brightest mode that we get on this thing. It's kind of blinding, to be honest. And moving back to our warm light, we have 300 lumens, 700 lumens, 1200 lumens, and then we have 2200 lumens on the turbo mode for the warm light. And then as a bonus, we have our red light, which starts off at 30 lumens, 70 lumens, and 150 lumens. Now that's a lot of modes, it's a lot of differences, and interestingly, they all have different battery run times. Of course, the more lumens that are going out, probably the shorter battery time you can expect on this thing. So the good news is, if you want a ton of battery life, let's say on the lowest setting of the red light, it's 32 hours. That's a lot of battery time. At the highest, it's 4.5 hours. It's plenty. But of course, that also means you're diving with a red light, which is a choice. But more realistically, you're probably going to be using the cool white light, or rather this light. So with this light, you're going to have 11.2 hours on this lowest mode, then 5.25 hours on this mode, then 3 hours on the highest mode, and on the turbo mode, you'll get about 6 minutes plus 40 minutes plus 1 hour. They want you to do math. That's about 2 hours. So anyways, I hope you don't mind me reading from the box. It was just a lot for me to try and remember, and I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm a diver. One interesting feature to call out is no matter what mode you're in, let's say I'm in this mode, if I want to get a quick white light, there is a feature for that. So maybe I am trying to be respectful of fish, and so I'm using a red light so that I don't harm the fish's eyes and they don't mind it. Then I need to communicate with someone. I can easily get, instead of flipping the switch all the way to the left, I can just double click. Oh, in the red, that double click has a little bit different semantics. So I guess that's a strobe in this mode. And that maybe makes sense, because if you have red, maybe you're trying not to disturb wildlife. So it puts you in a strobe mode. But let's say I'm in the cool white light mode or the warm white light mode, I can double click to get a kind of a higher bright mode, which they call neutral white light. And so this is the 4th color, and you can get to this color from either the left side, double click, or this side to the neutral white light, which runs at 1,300 lumens, or 3,300 lumens. I mean, I'm not a rocket scientist, but I'm definitely a diver. But anyways, it's bright enough. So I wanted to put this thing to the test and just make sure that it did actually give the battery time that is suggested. And so at turbo mode, it should be 2 hours. And I put this thing in water cooling because, of course, this thing depends on water cooling. It's important to know that it gets really hot out of the water. So this is a dive torch, and it's meant to be in the water for long use. If it is out of the water, make sure you don't touch the head, because that could burn your hand potentially. But anyways, I put this thing in the water, ran it for exactly 2 hours, and it burned out after 2 hours. So it's pretty true to the box for at least the cool white light mode. And just as a recap, we have cool white light mode, we have warm white light mode, and then we have neutral white light mode, and we have the red color. So I probably should have titled this video 4 lights. But anyways, the Switch has 3, so let's just go with that. Okay, so how does this thing operate underwater? So for the most part, I already mentioned to you that the Switch is perfectly easy to use without cold water gloves on. With cold water gloves on, it's a little harder, but not too bad. And so I was using this thing most of the time with the 1/4-inch threading attached to a ballpoint mount, and I just attached this thing to my camera. And so I was kind of interested to see how just videoing with it would run, because it does have a pretty wide beam. So this is a wide beam light. I should have mentioned that earlier, but this is a wide beam light, and so it comes out to about 160 degrees, but it's not that wide either. In fact, I have some comparison shots to another video light that was running that's much wider, and so you can kind of see the difference between a really wide light and this wide light, and you can take your preferences. Of course, there's no perfect. There's always a little bit of trade-offs here and there. So this one's kind of what I would consider a narrow wide beam, just passable for a video light and being able to illuminate things very clearly in front of you. Less so for a communication light, but it's somewhat also passable for communication light as well. So it's kind of in that middle narrow territory where it's kind of close to being useful for communication as a narrow beam, but it's more, at least in my opinion, more of a wide beam light. And so I was using it for video stuff. Now, one poor thing about it kind of being in the middle there is that you can kind of see in some of my lights, especially when I had it on brighter modes, it would kind of drown out my subject of whatever I was filming with too much light. And that's kind of the problem you get with narrow beam lights. And so this one's kind of in that middle spot where it could be used there, but it's just a little too narrow that I started basically having too much light on my subject. And so the beam just wasn't dispersed enough. But I did really experiment around with different subjects with the 3 different colors, cycling through them. And you can kind of see red is probably the most useless useless one. But red does have some circumstances. Like if you ever go in and see mandarin fish, when you're sitting and waiting for them, they will definitely be disturbed by any white light. So generally, if you use red light or that infrared light, they're not disturbed by it and they go about on their very way. And also if something's hunting at nighttime, red light tends to not disturb those nighttime animals or the deep sea critters with very low vision and big eyes. Red light will just generally be a lot nicer to their eyes and less blinding. So red light does have its uses, but not necessarily for filming. So don't use that as the only judge. With its battery life, I had no issue using it across multiple dives. Normally I start on low and I bump it up as necessary, and I often put it on turbo mode just to kind of show you that dramatic differences between the different lumens that it's pumping out, and also some other comparisons against this Divolk SL20C light series that I have. And you can kind of see that this is a much wider beam light than this one, and you can see them, how they compare for just kind of videoing different subjects. But I also used it to compare against this other dive torch, which is the Big Blue 5200 Tech Light, which is a different category altogether. It's great for communication, but if I were to try and film anything with this light on it, it's just going to be blown out. Good luck getting good footage with this light. It's a different purpose, and so while I'm definitely not saying it's a superior light in any way, it's still a light that I bring to every single video and show a healthy comparison for different lights. And so you can kind of see when I'm shining against the wall and I have the different modes on this one, you can see the comparison shots as I'm cycling through the different modes with this one. It's worth noting that this one is a fairly more narrow beam, but also kind of wide beam. It's like a hybrid. It's bright in the center and has a wide light around it, while this one is just going to be a fairly distributed light all the way around. So that's interesting to see next to each other and how they compare against one another. Now, it's not an apples to apples comparison, but this is the light that I just always use as my baseline to compare against. So at least hopefully you have a nice baseline as well. And of course, I have underwater comparison shots as well that are worth noting just to kind of see how the different beams behave. And I really just want you to get a good idea if this light is a good fit for you, just kind of as a common baseline and how it lights up different subjects, and also using it across different scenarios from murky water to night dives, even day dives. Oh, and that reminds me of a funny story. But first, I want to mention too that I didn't buy this light. This was provided by Sofirn as a review copy, which they were so kind to give me the chance to review this review video around the time that the product is launching, which I'm definitely excited to be able to do with more products as time moves on. And so this video isn't sponsored anyway. I'm under no obligation to give it a good review. I just wanted to use it thoroughly and give you my honest feedback. But if you are interested in buying this, I have a link in the description below that you can check out. And if you use that link, a small portion will go to support the channel, which I super appreciate. Okay, so back to my story. I was taking this thing out on the maiden dive, just giving it a try, and I had put it on a mount. I think it might have been this one. But anyways, I had a ball mount that busted on me on that dive, and I lost this dive torch, which I'm thinking I'm gonna make another video on just for the full story of how I found it, which is kind of interesting in its own right. But during this whole dive, I was like, just is absorbed in my mind that, oh no, I didn't get to review the dive torch, and I lost it. I have no way to form an opinion on it. Should I go and ask him for another one? Anyways, after all that said and done, by the end of the dive, kind of retraced a lot of steps that I went, and I somehow found this on the seafloor. So I guess it was meant to be. I was meant to be reunited with this thing. So we're companions now. The SD11. This thing's been through a lot. It and I. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video, now is a great time to like and subscribe. If you find this information valuable, share it with others. And by the way, if you're interested in being up to date with the latest and greatest in the scuba diving industry, I have a free newsletter, monthly newsletter, helps keep you informed with some great useful tips and tricks from me, and I hope to see you there. Check it out in the description. So needless to say, talking about build quality and maintenance considerations, this thing is built pretty sturdy, down to 100 meters, 2 O-rings, and I dropped this thing and lost it for a period of time, found it later, still working. And oh yeah, another mistake I made is I didn't close this thing all the way, and I forgot to put the battery in while charging it. And so I took it diving without the battery inside, which I do not recommend doing ever, but it happened to me and it wasn't closed all the way. So it did flood a little bit inside. I dried it out and it still works fine. It still works just fine, which I'm pretty happy to be able to also complete this review. So anyways, this thing has been through a lot and it's built pretty tough. I can definitely say for my accidental shenanigans, it's been through a lot and still works just fine. In terms of considerations for the switch, I do feel the switch, it has this kind of nice click feel to it. Whether that wears out over time is a consideration. They don't give you an extra button or anything, and it doesn't seem like you can swap it out. So I just wanted to point that out. It seems fine. I have no real considerations, but sometimes these things can wear out. There is a button involved, but this switch it feels nice. The switch feels nice, except for being a little small. I think I have no real considerations, just as a safety. If you are running this thing outside of water, be careful as head. It does get really hot. And so, who is this thing for? In short, it's a good beginner video light. It's not exceptional video light, but it's good for the price. It would be nice to be a little bit wider as a video light. But you can see from the shots and you can make an opinions on yourself if that is something that you're looking for. It is very nice to mount. It has a nice weight to it. It has a good runtime battery. It's very sturdy and reliable. And it could potentially be used as a backup as well. So if you do have a primary torch and you have this on your video light, if your primary goes out, you can still use your camera video light as your backup dive torch. For certain circumstances, especially night dives, you always want to have at least 2 dive lights, if not more. And given the different modes on this thing, it definitely can pass for communication as well. It can be pretty bright. It can pierce through pretty decently well. And with that mounting option, it's nice to be able to mount this onto things such as a Goodman handle or camera mounting. And this thing comes in about $75 at the time of this review. So what's your thoughts on the SD11? Is it for you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're looking for some more generic ideas and advice for dive torches to look for what to buy for yourself, check out this video up here. Or if you're looking for some other reviews on dive gear, check out this video series up here. And remember, the more you know, the more you love and protect the ocean. Until next time.